Thank you very much for all that you have been online. We are waiting for some minutes in order to start this seminar. And we are waiting also for some colleagues at this University of Central University of Catalonia, where we are doing the in-person session. Aquest és el punt d'aquí. I pots fer. I llavors entenc que tothom ja... Hola, bon dia. Sou per aquí, si vols. Okay, so let's start this online seminar. I want to welcome you all at the University of Central University of Catalonia. Those that you are at home, those you are here in this room. I want to introduce you Carmen Longas, who's a researcher at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam, and he's at the University of Vic because he's working with the Tractor Research Group and some researchers in sport and communication at this university in a project trying to understand how idols for teenagers are built based on sport narratives. Carmen is also doing her PhD, supervised by Chair Jacob van Stekenburg at the Erasmus University. And now this is the turn for her seminar. And it's a seminar also hosted by the network SPRING, which is the Sport and Politics Research Network, which is a network that was founded at the University of Vic, joined with different other universities in Europe. So Carmen, you have the floor, and thank you very much to be at the university.
Thank you for inviting me. All right. Yeah, thank you for being here. Well, I've already been presented, so I guess I'll skip my own presentation. But yeah, as you can see, my name is Carmen, and today, basically, what I'm bringing you is the results of my thesis, which I've been working now for almost 5 years at the Erasmus University. So I will try to make it in a nice and engaging way. I will try to show you what is the research, the thinking behind the research, how it looked like, what was the methods, and then some of the main findings. I will, of course, not go finding by finding, because otherwise it would be very tiring, because it's very difficult to summarize the work of 5 years in just a small seminar. Am I speaking too fast? Should I speak slower? All right. So a little bit about me and the project. As Xavier already said, I'm a lecturer and an almost finished PhD at the Erasmus University. Actually, I just have to go through the last feedback round from my supervisor. And as he also said, I'm supervised by Jacob van Sterkenburg and also Melody Samir, who is a research fellow at Jyväskylä University in Finland. So for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been involved in a research project funded by the NBO, which is the Dutch Research Council. So my PhD was part of a larger, broader research project that tried to understand how racist is televised football in 4 different European countries. So in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Spain, and Poland. So myself, I was in charge of conducting the research in Spain. Then my colleague Arne van Linden did it in Poland. And then Jaco van Sterkenburg focused more on the Dutch and the UK context. Here, well, continuing a little bit about me, you see two images of two cities that are important for me. On your left, you have Barcelona, which is where I studied. I don't have a communication background or journalism background. I have a background in psychology. So that is what I studied in Barcelona, where I graduated in 2014. And then right after I moved to the Netherlands to follow a research master in behavioral science, so also not really connected to communication, but I ended up at the Erasmus University doing this PhD. So that is a little bit about my own background. So what am I gonna be talking about today and what is the aim? So basically, as I said before, I just want to give you an overview. I hope that it's comprehensive of my PhD project. And basically, I'll follow a little bit the structure of a paper. So I'll start with introduction, theoretical framework, research questions, and then I'll present and discuss some of the main findings. I think that it will take me like about half an hour, and then we have time for questions. So let me introduce you to the topic. We're all known with racism in football stadiums, and especially in the context of Spain lately, what has happened with Vinicius and the racial abuse that he has endured has become very mediatized. It has been in the media a lot. However, this type of racism, where where some football fans they do racist chants, monkey chants, or racial insults towards players, it has been happening for a long time, and it does not only happen to Vinicius, but to a lot of players. This type of racism is what we call explicit or overt racism. It's like the outing of racist thinking or racist thoughts. And this is very clearly identifiable. So you can very clearly say, okay, this is racist. However, the focus of my dissertation was not on this type of racism, on explicit racism, but on another type of racism, much more subtle and difficult to grasp or identify, and also to challenge in that sense. So basically, my PhD has focused on what we call inferential or covert racism, which are, as it says here, those naturalized representations of events and situations relating to race, whether factual or fictional, which have racist premises and propositions inscribed in them as a set of unquestioned assumptions. So basically, I'm using maybe easier words. Inferential or covert racism refers to these things that we say related to race that we think are natural or normal, but actually they are not natural, they are not normal. They come from racial thinking, often rooted in the colonial past of Europe, and by reproducing such ideas, they we maintain existing power relations in relation to race in society. How does this happen in sports media, which is the focus of my thesis as well? In sports media, we see covert racism through the description of athletes. So there is a bunch of literature coming from communication, sports sociology, cultural studies that has tried to understand, okay, how are athletes and also footballers represented in sports media? It can be during commentary, live coverage, but also how football fans or any fans of sport talk about their athletes. And they have shown that this bunch of research has shown how the media describes sometimes athletes in ways that are racialized, so in reproducing some stereotypes about race and ethnicity. I've been talking for a while about race and ethnicity, or race/ethnicity. I will come back later to this, to how I understand race and ethnicity. So yeah, maybe a brief literature review on this literature that examines how the media and sports media gives meaning to race/ethnicity. So we see that often Black athletes are associated with an innate physical ability. So you're probably all familiar with these images where they compare a Black athlete with an animal, or they say, oh, he's naturally strong. And we have all these ideas about Black people or Black athletes having an innate ability for doing sport. On the other hand, and this research has found it, for example, in sports media coverage, but also on the imagery that is being used. I have an example later. And this is not always the case, but it is often, and it's an idea that gets reproduced again and again. On the other hand, we see that white athletes are more often associated with cognitive skills such as leadership or intelligence. This is more related to some of the earliest research or studies in this area. However, also now in more recent studies, we see that white athletes or white footballers, to take it more specific to my own research, they are described in various different ways. So just as people, like people have different characteristics, can be good in different things. And that is how white athletes or footballers are described, according to more recent literature. However, Black players tend to be stereotyped as, oh, they are the physical one, the one who is naturally athletic. Research has also focused on different types of racial or ethnic groups. And again, when I talk about racial ethnic groups, I talk about it as a social construct, not something that exists or that is material, but a category that we create socially. So there have been also studies where South American athletes are described or represented as hot-tempered, and also Asian as being weak or being less physically apt than other racial or ethnic groups. However, these meanings, the meanings associated to race or ethnicity, are not fixed and they change with the time. And we always need to understand them as located within a specific temporal and local context. And they also reflect wider power relations within the societies where these discourses or these ideas are given meaning. Just to give an example from the Spanish context, we all heard, probably you all heard some time ago, maybe not everybody, but sometime, if you think about Antonio Banderas, the Spanish actor, most Spanish people, if they had to choose, okay, how would you, and I know that in Spain we don't talk that much about race or ethnicity in an explicit way, but if you had to classify him white or Black, he would be a white person, right? But we all know how a few years ago, I think the Oscars Academy classified him as a Black actor. So this is an example of how race is not fixed and it's a social construct and something that we create, and that it is local to a specific context. And that is also how I conceptualize race in my research. Yeah, these are some examples of what I was saying before. So the association of Blackness with animal-like features, with running, for example, like a cheetah here, and we hear that sometimes in sports commentary, right? When they are talking about a Black footballer who's running a lot, or he's running like a cheetah, or like this much emphasis that is being placed on his physicality. And these ideas are often they're often rooted on colonial thinking, right? Those times where Blackness was associated to physical labor. So these ideas are not natural. They are not like this. Actually, race does not exist as a real thing. But yeah, these are ideas that have a history and that get reproduced nowadays. This is an example that I found when I was starting my PhD, and I thought, oh, it really reflects very well the idea behind my research. And that is, this is a headline from the Marca newspaper, the online one. And here it says in English, the midfielder that Real Madrid needs, the physical one, the smart one, the complete one, and the technical one. And if I didn't bring it here, so if you clicked on it, you would see that, well, they were discussing 4 different midfielders to be hired by Real Madrid. The physical one was a black player, was Pogba. And then the smart one was a white player, was a Dutch white player, Donny van Beek, I think. So here we see how this is also one example of how these ideas about race are reproduced in sports. Are there maybe any questions so far? Because we have time. So what I already talked about before, how do I conceptualize race ethnicity in my own research? I know that in Spain, it is not very, so racial studies are not very widespread, and it is difficult to talk about race. So if there are any questions, please just raise your hand and I will answer them. In research, race is often used as an analytical category that refers to physical features, right? So, for example, skin color or phenotype. On the other hand, we have ethnicity, which is often used to refer to a shared history, a shared culture, a shared language, basically a shared culture of a group of people. However, as you have already seen on the slides until now, in my research, I do not use race or I do not use ethnicity, but I use one concept for which, yeah, I could have come up with a new word, but in the end, we decided to just use race/ethnicity. And why do I do that? So I use it as one single concept because these two concepts or terms, they are used interchangeably often and they conflate in many ways. So how do I see this? So for example, if we think about an ethnicity which is very salient in the Spanish context, would you have an idea? We can talk about Gitanos, for example. They are a very salient ethnicity in Spain. Not so much represented in sports, so actually in football. So it's not going to play a big role in my thesis, in the result I'll show later. But it is a very good example to show, for example, how ideas about an ethnic group, which would be the Gitanos in Spain, they're often represented and thought of as usually race is thought of. So we associate certain characteristics to Gitanos, certain physical features as well, how they look like, etc. So we present them in a way as race has often been conceived, as something that is fixed characteristics that don't change and that also relate to how someone looks. So we see here a conflation between, okay, what is traditionally an ethnic group, but actually when we talk about this ethnic group or when we make sense of this ethnic group, we do it in a similar way as we do with race. So that we assign immutable characteristics to them, characteristics that don't change, that are passed on from the parents to the kids. And yeah, basically that don't change as we think about race, when we think about, for example, skin color or hair texture, that is passed on biologically. On the other hand, if we think about race, people often don't talk about race, and they talk about ethnicity when they may refer to physical features like skin color or hair texture or anything else. So often people talk about ethnicity or ethnic differences when we just want to refer to a physical feature, because it's deemed more politically correct, at least in the Spanish context. So you don't hear the word race that often, but ethnicity is more often used. So summing up, race and ethnicity have often been used as two different analytical categories, one referring to physical characteristics, the other one to more of a shared culture. However, I use them as one single concept, one socially constructed concept that is useful to understand how differences are constructed among groups of people and eventually as the basis for discrimination. I think this was the most difficult conceptual part of the whole seminar. So if you got it until here, now it's going to be easier. All right. So finally, we got to my research question, the one that has kept me busy for the last 4 or 5 years, and that is, how are discourses surrounding race ethnicity reconstructed in Spanish men's televised football? And how do these discourses relate to wider power relations in Spanish society? So basically, as you can see, I will focus a lot on discourse, on race, ethnicity, and my focus is also on Spanish men's televised football because it's one of the most popular ones in Spain. How has this research look like? So we divided this question into 3 different sub-questions. I didn't bring them here because it was too much text, but we divided them in 3 different sub-projects so that we could explore all the different aspects of the production of racial meaning through football commentary. I did 1 study, well, actually it was composed by 2 studies on content, another study on the audience reception, so how do football fans talk about race, ethnicity, and another study on production. And I'll talk later a little bit more in depth about the different methodologies, but you can already see a little bit how did I approach these different studies. Why focusing on those 3 different aspects? Because we inform ourselves with cultural studies and whole conceptualize this cultural circuit of meaning production. And he argues that meaning, so knowledge about, in this case, race, ethnicity, in the media is produced at 3 different moments. At the production of content, so what is being said in football commentary, when audiences interpret it, how do they interpret it? Do they just reproduce what they hear, or do they challenge it? Do they propose alternative interpretations? But also the production side, so the places, so for example, the newsrooms of football media, these also play a role in how these meanings are produced. But I will look at this more in depth later. The theoretical background. So basically, these 3 different theories or fields of studies have informed my research. On the one hand, cultural studies with Hall. On the other hand, critical race theory, and also studies on whiteness. And I will outline them in the next slides. Cultural studies. Is somebody familiar with cultural studies in this room? Yeah, okay, I see some people nodding. Okay, so cultural studies, the main proponent of which is Stuart Hall, sees media as a site where meanings are produced through the representation of different, in this case, athletes. These meanings are produced through which basically are the way that we talk, and but not only the way we talk, but how different practices create meaning about different events, or in this case about race and ethnicity. These discourses that we use about race, ethnicity, they also reflect wider power relations in society. So they are not just specific from football, but they are reflecting wider power relations in society. And here, I will come back to this later, colonialism, the colonial past of European nations plays a big role in these power relations and the discourses associated with it. And again, and I think I already talked about this before, context matters. So meanings associated to race, ethnicity are not fixed, but they change according to different social and historical contexts, as I illustrated before with the example of Antonio Banderas. Critical race theory. Anyone has worked with critical race theory before? I think it's not very common in Spain either. So maybe I'll give a bit more of background of where this theory comes from. It was originated in the beginning in the US after the civil rights movements, where supposedly laws were not differentiating between black or white people. Yeah, so supposedly to the law everybody was equal. However, scholars in the legal studies field, they realized that there were still inequities in society, right? So not everybody was equal, not everybody had the same opportunities, and discrimination still existed. So how was that possible? And that is how critical race theory emerged, to understand how, in a structural way, gets reproduced. So critical race studies, what it brings to my research is the understanding of racism, not as just individual acts that somebody, is a bad person and he shouts racist slur, but more like a structural thing that is embedded in all the institutions and social practices in our society. So that is the main addition of critical race theory to my own research. Also, it allows to center race, so that is to say, race is really a determinant of many social inequities in society. It explains that race is a social construct, so it does not exist as something we can't find a gene of the race of somebody. However, it does have material effects. So even if race as a biological thing does not exist, there are effects of race thinking. So people who are classified or perceived as belonging to certain races do suffer discrimination. So in the end, there are effects. And it also, critical race theory also highlights intersectionality. So race is central to understanding many inequities in society. However, race also intersects with other markers of difference, for example, gender or nationality in this case, and I'll show you some examples later. In the case of gender, my whole research is about race and masculinity. Right, because I will be focusing only on when I have focused only on men's football, so that means that all my results are about that intersection between masculinity and race. And finally, critical race theory also brings attention to whiteness, and I think this is also not very common in Spanish academia. And I will talk about whiteness, how I conceptualize whiteness later. So whiteness can be seen as a field of studies within critical race theory, but I have a couple of slides about it. So in my research, I understand whiteness as a discourse that privileges white identities. So in an attempt to show these power imbalances between different racial or ethnic groups, whiteness can be a really useful tool to show how certain groups, certain discourses, certain points of view have are more privileged than others and are seen as the norm, for example. And this often happens in an invisible way. So, for example, in my last study where I looked at the production of televised football, so I went to newsrooms to see how football commentary was produced. There, if we go there with a whiteness lens, then we can see how whiteness is the normative standpoint from which a lot of meaning is produced. And we do not realize about this, but yeah, that is the case often in knowledge production sites such as newsrooms. So most football journalists are white. However, they are talking about football players who are very racially, ethnically diverse. So whiteness allows us to see how these white perspectives, white way of thinking are central to the production of meaning in football. Are there any questions about this? Yeah, so this was already shown, and I just want to briefly go through the different methods that I use so that you know how did I come up with the result that I'll present right after. So the first project, which was about the content of televised football, what is televised football saying about race, ethnicity? I conducted two different studies. Study one was about football, post-match football commentary of club football. So to be clear about this, it was basically the transcriptions of this kind of TV program where journalists talk about the matches of the day. So I transcribed 10 hours about this from La Liga 2019, and the TV program was Directo Gol, I think, from Gol TV, which now has a different name. So I transcribed 10 hours of their commentary. It was the Sunday's emission. And then I did a verbal categorical content analysis informed by grounded theory. So that means that I used a bottom-up approach. So I looked at all the transcripts, how they talked about the different players according to their race or ethnicity, and then analyzed whether there were differences among the different groups of football players. And here, what's maybe innovative is that I use, and I have talked before about a lot of research using black and white players and comparing both. We know that the reality in Europe and Spain as well is not like this. We don't divide society between black and white people. They're not the most common categories. I used a layered approach to race ethnicity. So that means that I took every single player that they were talking about him on the commentary, and I attached several layers of racial ethnic categorization. So in one of the studies, I classified them as black or white. So each player would get a black or white label. But then there was also another layer, and there I used, for example, geographical origin. So was he from South America? Was he from Africa, and so on. So this is the way I approached race ethnicity in both studies. The second one was very similar, but the content was different. In this case, I used live commentary from matches of the national football team. And here it was a bit, the time span was a bit larger because I could not get a lot of matches from the last year, so I had to go a little bit farther. And these studies have resulted into published papers as well. So if you're interested, you can also have a look at them. That was for the content. Then there were 3 different sub-projects in my research. The second sub-project was about the audience. How do audiences give meaning to race ethnicity while talking about football? And in order to know this, I conducted 14 focus groups in the area of Barcelona. So the groups were between 2 people to, I think the largest one was like 5 people or 6 people in one group. In total, I had 27 female participants, 25 male participants, and they were between 18 to 35 years old. All of them were conducted in Barcelona or around the Barcelona area. I had some in Sant Cugat, I think. Yeah, and then I conducted also a thematic analysis. And this also resulted in another research paper. And finally, the methods for the last study, the production study, where we wanted to see, okay, how is meaning about race ethnicity produced in Spanish football newsrooms. There I interviewed 17 football journalists that worked on TV, radio, or print. They all worked at some point on television, but they, well, as you probably also know, football journalists, they work in different places. So they had all mostly worked on different types of mediums. Besides the interviews, I also conducted about 30 hours of observations in football newsrooms. So I went to 2 different football newsrooms and just sat there in a corner and observed and took some notes. And finally, I also conducted a thematic analysis. The paper has not yet been published, but it's already finished. We just need to submit it somewhere soon. So finally, I'm getting to the interesting part, which is the results. I will not go, as you probably imagine already, project or study by study, but I'll just present the main findings of the overall project. Otherwise, it will take very long and it would be very boring. So what was one of the main results of the whole project? That the discourse about Black physicality is very pervasive. So it has been found in many different national contexts and also in Spain. So what does that mean? That when I analyze the content of televised football, but also when I talk to audiences and also when I interviewed football journalists, they always use the discourse of Black physicality, of Black football players. Yeah, they have something in them that makes them physically superior to all the other football players. So this belief and this discourse is very much ingrained in televised football, and it is reproduced at different stages in the production, but also in the reception. So I brought you here an example of this. This was from an interview with a male football journalist from Spain. He said, it's evident that footballers, especially those from sub-Saharan Africa, at physical level, they are much more powerful than any other footballer of any other race. I don't know if it's because genetically they have this facility to develop their musculature, but the difference is tremendous. And this was very often found also with audiences, and I think that I brought you an example here. Oh no, this is from the live commentary of international football. So it was the game between Spain and Nigeria, and you could see how the football commentator said the Nigeria team is a good rival, physically superior to the Spanish one, but of course not technically superior. So again, here we see how this idea about Black football players, in this case, projected onto the whole Nigerian football team, was described also in line with this idea of the physical superiority of Black football players. So how can we give meaning to this, or how can we interpret this? Well, as I said before, these ideas of Black physicality, they often said to come from the colonial past, right? So it's not natural, it's not something that just exists out there, but we as people, we have talked about, we have constructed these discourses historically. Whereas it can be found in many different national contexts, as research has shown. In the Spanish context, we also have our own history, and we can also trace back to where these ideas about that associate Blackness with physical labor come from. And we can go back to the to Spanish colonialism. And for example, the one on the left is an image that I'm not very sure where it comes from. It seems like a book from Equatorial Guinea, which was one of the colonized territories from Spain. And there you can see how, well, history tells how a lot of Black people were used to cultivate and harvest cacao. Well, everybody knows what it is. And then how this was also reproduced through the products that we consume, right? So we see here an advertisement from Colacao, the one from a few years later when I was a kid. It was more or less reproducing the same idea, the same image, right? Black people carrying all this cacao on their shoulders and so on. So this is, so in understanding how football reproduces ideas about race ethnicity, we don't need to do it only in an isolated way, but we see how they reproduce wider discourses and power relations that already exist in society. And there are many examples like this one from Spanish media that we could show. Some more recent ones, but I really like the old ones. And what are the consequences of these discourses? Also, of course, yeah, they're not, you can say they're not ethical or whatever, but why would it be negative? Because sometimes we could say, okay, but if I say that a Black player, Black football player is very good at running or very fast, that is like a compliment, right? But when this becomes a stereotype and it becomes, the only way that we represent football Black players, then it has a consequence for how we understand Blackness in football. And I brought you here some examples of what could be the consequences in the domain of football. I don't know if you're familiar with the phenomenon of stacking. So that means the positioning of football players in positions because of their racial or ethnic background. So if we always talk about Black football players are fast, but we never talk about them as smart or leaders, then we will more likely put them in positions that require such characteristics. And for example, we will consider them, they will be considered less apt for example, a position of leadership or coaching. And this is a report from the FAIR network, to which I also participated together with Jaco and some of my colleagues, where it shows how I didn't bring any of the graphs, but where it shows how in Europe, in positions of leadership and coaching, ethnic minorities, especially women, but also men, are tremendously underrepresented. So most leadership positions are white males. So this is also to bring you some of the material effects in real life of these sort of discourses that sometimes some of them might seem innocuous or innocent. More results. Of course, as I said before, in Spain and in Europe, the reality is not black and white. We have also other discourses about other racial or ethnic groups. One of the findings from one of my content studies was that the Moroccan national team was their aggressiveness was very much emphasized. So the commentators were all the time making references to how aggressive they were towards other football players. For example, I brought you here an example. Look how he smacks him over there. Have you seen how he smacks that player? And that was like the tone for the whole match. Here, what I do in my conclusion is that I associate this discourse also with wider discourses about what it is to be Moroccan and what it is to be Muslim in Spanish society. So everybody knows what Islamophobic discourse entails, and in Spain, what we see is that Islamophobic discourse often conflates with the idea of what is to be Moroccan. And why? Because the largest Muslim group in Spain are those from Moroccan origin. So we see that a lot of this discourse, this Islamophobic discourse, conflates into the idea of Moroccanness. And well, my results show that in one of the content analyses, these ideas about what it is to be Moroccan in Spain, which is one of the most stigmatized groups, that also gets reproduced through televised football. However, and I think I have another slide for this. Yeah, I also found alternative discourses. So I don't want to send the message here that televised football is racist 100% of the time. That is not true. There are also other types of discourses that are reproduced through televised football and that they challenge sometimes this dominant discourse about race and ethnicity. So in one of my studies, the content study, Moroccan football players were often talked about as leaders and as intelligent. So this also shows how sports media, and in this case televised football, can also be a space for the reproduction of alternative discourses. So you can also challenge some of these dominant ideas. Then another interesting result that I found from this from my study was the construction of geocultural identities. And here I take a bit of a coloniality lens, and I see how through football discourse, how football audiences talk about football, but also how football commentators talk about football and the different places where footballers come from. They also reproduce an idea of the global north against the global south, the global north as advanced, developed, and the global south as poor, backward, and in a natural way. That's how it is, and it's not criticized. There's no much more depth into this. So, for example, I found that, and this is from the audience. Sorry, I didn't write it here. So this was a young girl or boy talking about the countries in South America. So they say, oh, they just make a ball from the cheapest materials that they have. Economically, they are underdeveloped countries and they don't have goods for making ping pong tables or whatever. So I found often this discourse among football audiences about, oh, players from Latin America, they are very good because they had nothing. So because they had nothing, they became very good because they played on the street. They just made a ball out of some clothes and they played. So this idea was repeated again and again, and it sort of naturalizes this idea of, okay, Latin America is poor, just naturally poor, and that's it. And there's no critical view on this. Another example related to this was how sometimes football commentators talk about football players with a migrant background. So if you remember Ansu Fati, who's not anymore with us at Barcelona, I found several times this narrative about him as the poor immigrant, the good immigrant who made it, right? So by the way, Ansu Fati arrived in Spain when he was 7 years old. His father was already working there. He arrived as an immigrant and they helped him a lot. And Ansu Fati undoubtedly has taken advantage of it. So also this idea of Spain as a receiver of immigrants, as a place where immigrants come and then we help them. And because we help them, they get passed. And I'm getting to the last of my results. So as I said before, intersectionality also plays a role in my research. And the analysis also was useful to see who belongs and who doesn't to the nation. So as I said before, I used transcripts from football matches of La Roja, of the Spanish national team. And you can see how also in those transcriptions, but also in how people talk about the Spanish national team, meanings are given to who belongs to the Spanish nation and who doesn't. So, for example, Spanishness was reinforced as white. So we know from global discourses that Spain is constructed as white. But this was also reinforced through televised football commentary and in conversations with audiences. So, for example, all the national sporting heroes that were constructed through discourse, they were white, and they were also praised for their intelligence and morality. So again, creating this binary between, whiteness is moral, rational, and intelligent. And here, this is one example from one of my audience participants. And I think this was before we knew certain things about Gerard Piqué. But Gerard Piqué is someone who is very clear-headed. I think he's got a logic reasoning and cool ideas. So often those seen as the preferred footballers from the national team, their idols, they were always white and praised many times for their morality or their cognitive skills. Also in conversations, and I don't know if you saw this some time ago, well, not some time ago, I think that was last week, there was controversy with a German researcher that also asked people whether they would like to have more white people in their national team, the national football team. Well, I talked about the same topic, didn't ask the same question, but I talked about the same topic with my audiences. And you could also see that they conditionally accepted that football players that are not white play for the national team. So they would not just say like, yeah, of course, why would, I don't know, Ansu Fati not play for the Spanish national team? He's Spanish. No, there was always a condition. There was always like, yes, as long as, for example, they perform well, as long as they feel Spanish, and so on. So there's always a condition for football players who are not white to be accepted by the audience as any other team member. And this also aligns with wider discourses about race in Spanish society. So I don't know if you know this book from Rubén Bermúdez, can't speak Spanish and English at the same time. It's very difficult. Who is I think a black Spanish journalist, and he has a book also where he showcases how he navigates being black and Spanish at the same time. Something that it is very difficult because in the dominant discourse you cannot be white, you cannot be Spanish and black at the same time. So more or less, my results showcase that football commentary sort of contributes to the reproduction of this discourse. So yeah, we see from research how Black, Asian, Muslim Spaniards, they are excluded from the idea of being Spanish. And this, of course, also relates. We also have other examples in Spanish sport. So we know all the case with Ana Peleteiro, who has always had to navigate her blackness as a Spanish woman. And we also have this recent case with Auri Boquesa, who also says representing Spain, not being white is difficult. And this was from your Twitter account. So we see this also happening outside televised football. So finally, what enables these discourses in televised football? In order to answer this question, my final study on production, so when I went to sports newsrooms and when I interviewed football journalists, provided some ideas, some answers to this. And the whiteness lens also helps to provide an answer. So what we see what I saw in Spanish newsrooms, football newsrooms, is that they are white hegemonic spaces where everybody is white. And probably that means that also white viewpoints, which are also the viewpoints that I have, the dominant viewpoints in Spanish society, are also the dominant viewpoints from which televised football is being produced. And when somebody identifies himself as white, then it's very difficult also to see the biases that your own frameworks are making you have, right? So yeah, basically, when talking with football journalists, I could see that there were many discursive strategies that hinder the self-reflection in order to overcome biases. So for example, there was a lot of color evasive discourse. Maybe you have heard it as colorblind discourse. However, now I prefer to use color evasive because so to use one that does not use disability as a term that does not use disability, such as colorblind. So a lot of journalists would say, yeah, I don't see color. I don't care about the color of my colleagues. You know, I only care if they're good journalists, right? When talking about hiring practices or who would they consider a good football journalist. So color is not important. Race is not important. And also we see, and this links also to dominant discourses in Spain, the erasure of the colonial past. So when we talk about diversity, racial ethnic diversity with journalists, this is always linked to migration. So it's never linked to the colonial past, but rather like racial ethnic diversity is arrived in the last 15, 20 years. There were no Black people before in Spain, there were no Asian people in Spain before. So this is also a very limited understanding of racism that does not help into producing a more equal or less biased televised football. So conclusion, this was a difficult slide to make, summarizing everything. Spanish televised football discursively reproduces wider power relationships. For example, as I have shown with the discourse about Black physicality, the discourse about Moroccan football players. Football audiences also play a relevant role in this. So that means that if we want to challenge dominant discourses, we also need to look not only at the football journalists and what they're saying, but also audiences, how do they talk about it? Because they're also an opportunity for challenging them. Football newsrooms are white hegemonic spaces where whiteness, white understandings, white point of views are the normative point of view from where televised football is produced. And this is maintained by discursive practices that reproduce racial ethnic hierarchies, such as color evasiveness, the erasure of colonial legacies, and yeah, just very limited understandings of how racism works in society. And I think that this is my last slide. Yes, and the last one is the thank you one. So now if you have questions, you can just, I can just answer them. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any questions? Any questions? Yes.
Yes, I have questions. Thank you very much, Carmen, for your presentation. I have two questions. The first question is, in your study one, you compared the live commentary between La Liga and the Spanish national football team, right? Do you think any differences between these two types of football matches in field of?
Yeah, I never compared them explicitly, but I can compare them now if you want. And the results were very different, actually. So my first analysis of the content of club football, post-match football, I found a lot of challenging discourses. So not the dominant ones, but for example, there I found that that it was white Spanish football players that were described as physical. And instead, I did not find the black physicality discourse in my first study, but I did find it in the second one. And I think that shows also a little bit the ambivalence of discourses about race, ethnicity in the media, right? So they are not homogeneous, they're not always the same, but still in very insidious and subtle ways, these discourses that have a history and that maintain racial hierarchies, they still get reproduced, but not all the time. And that is what makes it difficult to spot them. So that was the main difference in my study of national football. There I found more dominant discourses. So the one about Moroccan football players as aggressive, the one about black physicality. In the first study, it was a bit more ambivalent. It could also be because there could be a methodological reason as well. The one where I found more challenging discourses was only one football program, and it was 2019. The one on national football, where I found more dominant discourses, such as the black physicality discourse, that one was included football matches from 2013 until the present, so they were a bit older. It also included different types of football media, so different channels, different type of football commentators. So that might also explain, a bit more different results. Yeah.
Okay, I still have a question. Because you interviewed a sports journalist and you analysis commentary from sports commentator, but I propose that the sports media practitioners, like journalists and the commentators, they are more careful of racist discourse than football fans. You introduced the Valencia football fans accident to Vinicius. Firstly, do you think it is valuable to analyze the racist discourse on Twitter?
Yeah, certainly. And what do you mean by Twitter? You mean the Twitter posts from?
Yeah, the Twitter posts from football fans.
From football fans. Yeah, certainly. And there's some research from people, like Daniel Kilvington. I think they focus a lot on social media abuse. And certainly social media is a place where everything can be said and where a lot of racist abuse happens as well. Yeah, certainly that's a relevant area of research, I think.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Carmen, we can close your PowerPoint if you want, because on the internet, everybody. Let me see. Okay, that's perfect. Any other questions?
No. Yes, two comments that for me are important at this moment. It's all the question of Islamophobia with Moroccan people, because, for example, 2 days ago in Catalan radio, I could listen about joking about the quantity of children playing with Moroccan t-shirt, the national team, and just joking, but showing the image of invasion of how the Moroccan are here, and just after the elections, the European elections, and it was curious to use this kind of joke. And then it's not only football. Football is not only Moroccan. It's as you told perfectly, Islamophobia, one part of the Islamophobia.
In relation to this, just like a month ago, when I wake up in the Netherlands, sometimes I listen to Catalunya Radio in the morning so I can wake up. And I also heard, like, in the context of joking, that's where also explicit racism is sometimes allowed. And they were referring to the owner of Paris Saint-Germain, PSG, as aquel moro, that more from I don't know, but it was something that is generally not accepted. You would never use the word motto in live commentary or something like this, but in the context of joking and of football, they used it. It was like, oh yeah, we can do it. So yeah, it was also the radio.
Yeah, and the second one is the question of this dialectic between muscle and brain. No? That blacks are muscle and white are brain. And the most important question is something that habitually we don't used to speak about and to talk about, is that you propose the where are the black coaches, the black trainers in Europe, and you can find them. No?
Yeah.
And this is something that if you are continuously talking about trainers or players, black players being muscle and not brain, obviously it's very difficult for them to arrive to be coaches. And actually you can find black coaches in the main leagues around Europe.
Yeah, it's the power of discourse.
Yeah. That is something that's no, but probably because they are no, and probably I was thinking about now, and I remember Zinedine Zidane, French, is one of them, but there are not a lot.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's like it's regarding the Spanish national team. So you might see nowadays the squad is more from other parts of Spain than from Madrid. So you see in the tweets like people are taking only from Barcelona, from the Basque, from the Galicia, but there are no Madrid players. And it's like, what do you think about it? Like there is now some agendas going on, like the Madrid players are not being selected to the national team.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, finishing this dissertation doesn't leave me a lot of time to see what's the Spanish national team. So I don't know who is on the Spanish national team now, but I believe you. That is something that my research does not look at much in depth, and that is the plurinational nature of Spain. So Spain is composed by different nations, and that also is reflected on the Spanish national team. And probably there are very interesting dynamics happening there, but I did not explore them. So I focused more on race, but of course it would be nice to see how that intersects with all the different nations within Spain. And I guess what you say now, there are not many players from Madrid. I'm curious how they're talking about this or what is being said. Do you have an example of what people say? Or
yeah, there are a lot of examples. Like when Brahim Diaz was playing for Madrid, so he was not selected, and now he's playing for Morocco. And Lamine Yamal was selected from. So they were like, okay, since he's coming from Barcelona, he's been selected, and Brahim Diaz is not being selected because he's from Madrid.
Okay.
So it's in the tweets, and people who are from the Madrid fan base, and also even Nacho and Dani Carvajal. Okay, now they have been selected to the national team. But before, like when they were not being selected, like they have been selecting Capao, Cubarsi, Sergio Roberto because they are from Barcelona, and Spanish national team is preferring Barcelona players only.
Okay.
So there are a lot of things happening now.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay, any other questions?
Can we lunch?
Yes, of course.
Perfect.
Okay, so thank you very much to everyone for being at the University of Vic. Thank you very much to all of the people that have been online listening this seminar. Thank you very much, Carmen, for your fantastic presentation, and hope we can discuss more this during the lunchtime.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now we can have lunch. €19 per cap. Tot el que no està produint. Perfecte, tu pots vendre coses. Com és?
No, let's go.
Sí.
Let's go already.
Let's go. Go. We
ser això, tindré que parlar d'aquest trastorn. Clar, em estava entrevista en base de ràdio, corrent amb les som de confiança, molt bé, que es normalitza una frase com aquesta.
L'altre dia, això que ja va escoltar a Catalunya Ràdio, jo ho vaig escoltar a RAC1. Hi ha un programa sobre la manera de posar en l'aire tot el tema dels